Margaret sat on the porch of her small cottage, gazing out at the vast landscape before her. The early morning sun bathed the world in a golden glow, casting long shadows across the fields and gently illuminating the leaves of the trees. The air was fresh and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth. It was a morning like no other, quiet, still, and full of promise. For many years, Margaret had lived a life that was fast-paced and filled with responsibilities. Between raising her children, managing her career, and caring for her family, she had little time to simply pause and appreciate the world around her. But now, in her later years, she found herself drawn to the peacefulness of nature. After the loss of her beloved husband, Henry, Margaret had felt adrift. The grief weighed heavily on her, and she felt disconnected from the world. But as time passed, she began to feel the pull of the earth, calling her to reconnect with the natural world. It had started with small steps. Margaret had always enjoyed gardening, but now she found herself spending more and more time in her garden, tending to the plants, feeling the soil between her fingers, and watching the flowers bloom. She had always found solace in the earth, but now it felt different. It felt as though the earth was offering her a quiet, gentle embrace, reminding her of the cyclical nature of life: birth, growth, decay, and renewal. As Margaret worked in the garden, she began to notice something she had never really paid attention to before. The soil was alive, teeming with tiny creatures that burrowed beneath the surface. The flowers that bloomed were not just beautiful, they were part of a larger system, each contributing to the balance of nature. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches reaching toward the sky, while the birds perched on the branches, singing songs of freedom and joy. All around her, nature was alive and vibrant, and Margaret felt an overwhelming sense of peace. One afternoon, as Margaret worked in her garden, her daughter Emily came to visit. Emily had noticed the change in her mother recently, how Margaret had started to spend more time outside, how she had become more peaceful and content. Emily had been concerned for her mother after Henry's passing, but now she saw that Margaret was finding a new sense of purpose in her life. "Mom," Emily said as she joined Margaret in the garden, "I've been noticing how much more time you're spending outside lately. How are you feeling?" Margaret paused for a moment, looking at her daughter with a soft smile. "I'm feeling different, Emily. I've been thinking a lot about how I've spent my life, always rushing around, always so focused on getting things done. But now I've started to slow down. Spending time in the garden, feeling the earth beneath my feet, it's like I'm reconnecting with something I had forgotten." Emily nodded, understanding her mother's words. "It's amazing how nature can do that, isn't it? It's like it has a way of grounding us, reminding us of what's truly important." Margaret agreed. "Yes, it's like the earth is teaching me something. I've spent so many years living in a rush, but now I'm learning to appreciate the small things. The way the sunlight filters through the trees, the sound of the wind rustling the leaves, the way the soil feels in my hands. Nature has a way of bringing us back to the present moment, helping us find peace." As the days passed, Margaret continued to spend more and more time in nature. She took long walks through the nearby woods, letting the sounds of the forest calm her mind. She breathed in the fresh air, feeling the weight of the world lift off her shoulders with each step she took. With every walk, she felt more connected to the earth, as if the land beneath her feet was carrying her forward, helping her heal in ways she couldn't fully explain. One morning, Margaret decided to go for a walk by the river that ran near her home. She had always loved the sound of the water, the gentle rush of the current as it moved over the rocks. As she walked along the bank, She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the water wash over her. The rhythmic flow of the river seemed to match the rhythm of her own heartbeat, and she felt a deep sense of calm. It was in moments like this, when she was surrounded by nature, that Margaret found herself truly at peace. She realized that she had spent so many years focusing on the past, on the things she couldn't change. But now she was learning to let go and embrace the present moment. The earth had a way of teaching her to do that, to let go of the worries and burdens that weighed her down and simply be. Over time, Margaret began to notice the positive changes that nature had brought to her life. She felt stronger, both physically and emotionally. Her heart felt lighter, her thoughts clearer. She slept better at night, and she woke up each morning with a renewed sense of energy and purpose. Nature had become her sanctuary, a place where she could find solace and healing. One day, as Margaret was sitting on her porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she realized that her connection to the earth had become more than just a way to pass the time. It had become a source of strength, a way for her to heal from the pain of her past and to find peace in the present. The earth had a way of reminding her that life was not about what you had or what you could achieve. It was about being present, being grounded, and appreciating the beauty of the world around you. Margaret smiled to herself as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky. She had found something precious in the embrace of nature, something that had healed her in ways she never could have imagined. The earth had become her teacher, her guide, and her sanctuary. And as she sat there, surrounded by the beauty of the world, she knew that this connection would be with her for the rest of her life. Margaret stood at the edge of the small lake, the cool breeze rustling through the trees behind her. The water before her was still, the surface reflecting the sky in a perfect mirror. For a moment, she simply stood there, taking in the quiet beauty of the scene. She had come here often since moving to her new home, and each time the lake seemed to offer her a sense of calm that nothing else could. Water had always held a special place in Margaret's heart. She remembered the days when she and Henry would take long walks by the lake, enjoying the peace that came from being near the water. The gentle lapping of the waves against the shore had always soothed her, and the sound had a way of quieting the chaos in her mind. After Henry's passing, Margaret had returned to the lake, hoping that it might offer her some comfort. What she hadn't expected was how deeply the water would touch her soul. At first, it was simply the beauty of the lake that drew her in. But as she spent more time there, she began to notice something deeper. The water had a healing quality that went beyond its appearance. She could feel it in her body, the way the cool air and the gentle sound of the water seemed to cleanse her, to wash away the stress and worry that had accumulated over the years. Margaret had always heard that water had healing properties, but she had never truly understood it until she experienced it for herself. It wasn't just the physical benefits of being near water, though those were certainly important. It was the emotional and mental healing that the water seemed to offer. There was something about the way the water moved, the way it flowed effortlessly, that reminded her of the flow of life itself. One afternoon, Margaret decided to sit by the lake and meditate. She closed her eyes, taking in the rhythmic sound of the water as it lapped against the shore. She breathed in deeply, feeling the cool, crisp air fill her lungs, and slowly exhaled, letting go of the tension that had been building in her body. As she sat there, she felt a deep sense of connection to the earth, to the water, and to herself. It was as if the lake was inviting her to let go, to surrender to the flow of life, and to trust that everything would unfold as it was meant to. Over time, Margaret began to notice that her visits to the lake had a profound effect on her emotional well-being. Whenever she felt overwhelmed by grief, stress, or anxiety, she would return to the water, and each time it seemed to offer her the peace she so desperately needed. The water became her sanctuary, a place where she could find solace and clarity. One afternoon, as Margaret sat by the lake, she was joined by Emily, who had come to visit her. Margaret noticed how tense Emily seemed as she sat down beside her shoulders hunched and her brow furrowed. Emily had always been a busy woman, constantly juggling her career and family responsibilities, and Margaret knew that she had been struggling with the pressures of life. "Mom," Emily said softly, "I don't know how you do it. You seem so at peace all the time, and I'm over here running around, stressed out and feeling like I'm never enough." Margaret smiled gently, understanding her daughter's frustrations. She had been in Emily's shoes many years ago, caught up in the rush of life, always trying to keep up with everything. But Margaret had learned that true peace didn't come from doing more. It came from being present, from finding moments of stillness and connection. "Sweetheart," Margaret said, placing a hand on Emily's arm, "the world can be a chaotic place, and it's easy to get lost in the hustle and bustle. But I've found that the key to peace is in nature in moments like this. The water, the earth, the trees, they all have a way of reminding us to slow down, to breathe, and to let go of what we can't control. When I'm here, I feel like I can just be." Emily looked at her mother, her eyes searching for answers. "I don't know how to do that. I'm always thinking about the next thing, always worried about what's coming next." "How do you just let go?" Margaret chuckled softly. "It takes time, my dear. It's not something that happens overnight. But nature has a way of helping us do that. It teaches us that we don't have to fight against the flow of life. Just like the water flows effortlessly, we too can learn to go with the flow, to trust that everything will unfold as it should." Emily took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing as she gazed out at the lake. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of calm begin to wash over her. She'd been so focused on achieving, on constantly striving for success, that she'd forgotten the importance of simply being. She realized that Margaret was right. There was power in surrendering, in allowing herself to slow down and trust the process of life. As the days passed, Emily began to spend more time with her mother by the lake. They took long walks together, sharing stories and quiet moments of reflection. Slowly, Emily started to incorporate the lessons she had learned from Margaret and the lake into her own life. She found herself taking more breaks, breathing deeply, and finding moments of stillness throughout her day. Margaret watched as Emily began to change, her tension easing and her smile becoming more genuine. She was proud of her daughter for taking the time to connect with nature and to embrace the healing power it offered. Margaret knew that, like her, Emily would one day come to understand the wisdom that nature had to offer. It was a gift that kept on giving, a gift that would stay with her for the rest of her life. As Margaret sat by the lake, feeling the gentle breeze and listening to the soothing sound of the water, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had discovered a sanctuary in nature, a place where she could find healing and peace, and she was grateful for the opportunity to share this gift with her daughter, knowing that the healing power of water would continue to nourish and restore them both. Margaret walked slowly through the forest, her feet crunching on the dry leaves beneath her. It was early morning, and the sun was just beginning to peek through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of pine and earth. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional chirping of birds or the rustling of leaves as the wind passed through the branches. This was Margaret's sanctuary, her place of peace. She had discovered it after Henry's death, when she found herself longing for a way to escape the overwhelming grief that had consumed her. At first, she had simply walked through the forest to clear her mind, but over time, the forest had become more than just a place to escape. It had become a source of healing. As she walked deeper into the forest, Margaret felt her thoughts begin to slow. She had learned to leave her worries at the edge of the trees, allowing the forest to absorb them. There was something about the stillness of the woods that calmed her, something about the ancient trees that seemed to whisper wisdom to her. The first time Margaret had ventured into the forest after Henry's death, she had felt lost and alone. But as she walked deeper into the woods, she began to feel a sense of connection, a feeling that the earth beneath her feet was grounding her, that the trees around her were offering their support. It was as if the forest was embracing her, offering her comfort and peace. Now, every time Margaret walked through the forest, she felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. The gentle sway of the trees, the sound of the wind whispering through the leaves, and the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy all worked together to create an atmosphere of serenity. In the forest, she could breathe deeply, relax, and let go of the stress and grief that had burdened her for so long. Margaret had learned that the forest had a way of putting things into perspective. In the midst of her grief and loss, the forest reminded her of the natural cycles of life, the way the seasons changed, the way the leaves fell from the trees and were reborn again in the spring. Life, she realized, was full of ups and downs, of beginnings and endings, and the forest was a living example of this constant ebb and flow. One day, as Margaret sat on a fallen log, taking a break from her walk, she noticed a deer in the distance. The deer moved gracefully through the trees, its head held high and its ear twitching at the slightest sound. Margaret watched it for a moment, feeling a sense of wonder. There was something so peaceful about the way the deer moved, so at ease in its environment. It reminded Margaret of the importance of living in harmony with the world around her, of being present in the moment and trusting that everything would unfold as it should. Margaret smiled to herself, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the forest. It had become her teacher, her guide, and her sanctuary. She had learned so much from it about patience, resilience, and the power of stillness. The forest had taught her to slow down, to listen, and to be present, to appreciate the beauty of life in all its forms. As she continued her walk, Margaret thought about the many times she had felt overwhelmed by life. There had been moments when she felt like giving up, moments when she questioned whether she could go on. But every time she returned to the forest, she found the strength to keep moving forward. The forest had a way of putting things into perspective, of reminding her that life was not about perfection, but about finding peace in the present moment. Margaret had also come to understand that the forest was a reflection of her own journey. Just as the trees grew and changed with the seasons, so too did she. There were times of growth, of flourishing, and there were times of loss and letting go. But just as the forest was always changing, it was also always enduring. It was a place of renewal, of healing, and of hope. As the sun began to set, Margaret found herself standing in a small clearing, looking up at the sky. The last rays of sunlight bathed the forest in a warm golden glow, and Margaret felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. She had learned so much from this place, from the stillness of the trees and the quiet wisdom of the earth. The forest had taught her that life was not about rushing from one thing to the next, but about being present, about taking the time to appreciate the beauty around her. It had taught her to embrace the cycles of life, the times of growth and renewal, as well as the times of loss and transformation. And most importantly, it had taught her to be gentle with herself, to allow herself the space to heal, and to trust that everything would unfold in its own time. Margaret took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air and feeling the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. In the presence of the forest, she felt lighter, more connected to herself and to the world around her. She knew that the forest would always be there, a constant source of comfort and healing in her life. And as she walked back home, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for this sacred place, for the lessons it had taught her, and for the peace it had brought into her life. Margaret had always known that the sun was important. After all, it was the source of life for all living things. But it wasn't until the past few years, after the loss of Henry and the years of grief that followed, that she truly understood the healing power of sunlight. It all began one spring morning when Margaret stepped out into her garden, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin for the first time in what felt like forever. The air was fresh and crisp, the earth beneath her feet still damp from the morning dew, and the sunlight bathed everything in a soft golden hue. For a long time, she had avoided spending much time outside. The grief she felt after Henry's passing had made her retreat inward, and the weight of it all had kept her from seeking out the healing embrace of nature. But that day, something shifted. Margaret stood there for a moment, closing her eyes and letting the sun wash over her face. It was as if the light was infusing her body with warmth, energy, and life. She could feel it in her bones, in her muscles, in every cell of her body. The warmth of the sun brought a sense of peace to her mind, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of comfort and relief. It was like a balm for her soul, soothing the raw edges of her grief. She didn't understand it completely at first, but Margaret started to realize that there was something truly special about sunlight. It wasn't just about the physical warmth, it was about the way it made her feel alive, grounded, and connected to the world around her. The sun had a way of putting things into perspective, of reminding her that life went on, that the world was still turning, and that there was still beauty and joy to be found. As the days went by, Margaret began to make it a habit to spend more time outside. She would sit in her garden in the mornings, soaking in the sunlight while tending to the flowers and plants she had lovingly nurtured over the years. She would walk around her property, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin as she took in the beauty of the natural world around her. It was during these moments that Margaret began to notice just how much the sun had to offer, not only in terms of physical healing, but also in terms of emotional healing. Margaret started to learn about the many benefits of sunlight. She read about how exposure to sunlight helps to boost mood and reduce stress, how it helps the body produce vitamin D, and how it can improve sleep and overall health. She had always known that sunlight was necessary for the body to function properly, but now she understood that it was also essential for her emotional and mental well-being. There were days when Margaret felt particularly weighed down by the weight of her grief. On those days, she would go outside and sit in the sun for as long as she could. The warmth would spread through her body, and the heaviness in her chest would begin to lift. It was as though the sun was reminding her to breathe, to take a moment for herself, and to remember that it was okay to feel joy, even in the midst of sadness. One afternoon, as she sat in her garden, Emily came to visit. She noticed her mother sitting in the sunlight, her face turned upward toward the sky, her eyes closed in contentment. Emily had seen this new routine of Margaret's, a daily ritual of soaking in the sun, of reconnecting with the world around her, and she had begun to notice the change in her mother. Margaret seemed lighter, more at peace. "Mom," Emily said softly as she sat down beside her, "I've noticed you've been spending a lot more time outside lately. You seem different." Margaret smiled and opened her eyes, turning to Emily. "I've discovered something, my dear. The sun, it has a way of healing me. It's not just the warmth on my skin, but the way it makes me feel alive again. It's like a reminder that there is still light in the world, even after all the darkness I've been through." Emily listened intently, her heart full of understanding. She had watched her mother struggle through her grief, and it had been hard for her to see Margaret retreat from the world. But now she saw her mother finding something that helped, something that gave her strength. "I think it's amazing, Mom," Emily said. "I've been so focused on everything else, and I've neglected to appreciate the simple things like the sunlight. Maybe I should try it too." Margaret nodded. "It's more than just getting outside. It's about being open to the healing that's available to us if we just allow ourselves to receive it. The sun, the earth, the water, they all have something to offer, but we have to be willing to pause and take it in." From that day forward, Emily began to join her mother in the mornings, sitting outside in the sunlight, breathing in the fresh air, and taking time to simply be. It was a small change, but it made a big difference in both of their lives. Emily noticed that she felt more relaxed, more centered, and more present in the moment. Margaret, too, felt her energy return as the sunlight filled her with warmth and light. As the weeks passed, Margaret's routine became a cherished part of her day. She would wake up early, go outside, and sit in the sun for a while before starting her day. She noticed that the more time she spent outside, the more at peace she felt. The sun had become her ally, helping her heal, helping her to find a sense of balance and calm in the chaos of life. Margaret realized that the sun was more than just a source of light. It was a reminder that no matter what happened in life, the world kept turning, the sun kept rising, and there was always hope on the horizon. Each day brought new opportunities, new moments of joy, and new reasons to be grateful. And it was in the warmth of the sun that Margaret found the strength to embrace the future with open arms. As she sat there, feeling the sun on her skin, Margaret whispered a quiet thank you to the world. She had learned that sometimes the simplest things, like the warmth of the sun or the sound of a bird singing, could bring the greatest healing. And for that, she would be forever grateful. Margaret stood at the edge of the small hiking trail, the wind rustling through the trees and carrying with it the fresh scent of pine and earth. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, allowing the crisp, cool air to fill her lungs. It felt as though the air itself was healing her, sweeping away the last remnants of grief and tension that had held her captive for so long. For a moment, she simply stood there, savoring the peace of the forest, the air, and the world around her. It had been several weeks since Margaret had started her daily walks in the woods. Each day, she made it a point to get outside and breathe in the fresh air, to allow nature to work its magic on her. At first, she had only done it to get some exercise, to feel the sunshine and wind on her skin. But she soon discovered that the act of breathing deeply in nature had far more profound effects than she could have ever imagined. The simple act of inhaling the fresh, untainted air seemed to clear her mind and calm her heart, offering her a reprieve from the sorrow and anxiety that had weighed her down for so long. Margaret was no stranger to the power of fresh air. Growing up, she had spent many hours outdoors, playing with her siblings in the fields and forests surrounding her childhood home. Her parents had always encouraged outdoor activities, And it was in the open air that Margaret had found some of her happiest moments. But over the years, as life became busier and more demanding, she had lost touch with the simple joys of being outdoors. The pressures of work, family, and life in general had left her feeling disconnected from the natural world. It wasn't until after Henry's death that Margaret rediscovered the importance of fresh air and the healing power it held. On her walks, Margaret began to notice how different the air felt in the forest compared to the city. In the city, the air always seemed thick, heavy with pollution and suffocating. But here in the woods, the air was crisp and clean, invigorating her with each breath she took. It was as if the air itself was alive, purging her of the negativity that had built up inside her over the years. Every deep breath she took was like a small release, a letting go of the pain and sorrow she had carried for so long. One afternoon, as she sat on a bench overlooking a small stream, Emily came to visit again. She'd been coming by regularly to check on her mother, and each time she noticed how much more relaxed Margaret seemed. Emily had always admired her mother's strength, but lately she was seeing a side of Margaret that was softer, more open, and more at peace. Margaret had found something in the outdoors, something that had helped her heal in ways that nothing else had. "Mom," Emily said, sitting down beside her, "I can't believe how much calmer you seem lately. You really have found something here, haven't you?" Margaret smiled gently, looking at the stream as the water flowed over the rocks. "Yes, I've found something I didn't know I needed, Emily. Fresh air, the kind that comes from being in nature, has a way of cleansing not just the body, but the soul as well. I can feel it every time I take a breath, as if the air itself is washing away all the worries and the heartache I've carried for so long." Emily nodded, watching her mother with a newfound sense of understanding. "I've been so caught up in my own life, trying to get ahead, to make things happen, but maybe I need to slow down, to appreciate the simple things like you're doing." Margaret placed a hand on Emily's. "You don't have to go to the extremes I did, sweetheart. But I've learned that when we take the time to stop, to breathe, and to reconnect with the earth around us, we find a kind of peace that we can't find anywhere else. We don't need to control everything. We just need to be present." The conversation lingered with Emily long after they had finished their walk and returned to Margaret's home. She couldn't help but think about the way her mother seemed to be flourishing in the midst of what was supposed to be a time of loss. Margaret had found something that so many people overlooked: the simple act of breathing in fresh air, of reconnecting with nature, had given her a renewed sense of clarity and peace. Over the following weeks, Emily joined Margaret on her walks, and together they spent more and more time outside. Margaret had taught her daughter how to slow down, how to take a deep breath and simply enjoy the world around them. Emily found herself breathing more deeply, noticing the small things, the way the light filtered through the leaves, the sound of birds singing in the trees, the way the air felt fresh and clean. It was a kind of mindfulness that Emily had never experienced before, and it was exactly what she needed. As Margaret continued to take long walks in the woods and breathe in the fresh air, she began to feel even more connected to the earth. The weight of her grief began to lift, replaced by a sense of lightness and freedom. Each breath she took felt like a renewal, a reminder that life was still full of beauty and wonder. Margaret understood now that, just like the air, life was always moving forward, and she didn't have to hold on to the past. She could let go and embrace the present moment. The healing power of fresh air was not just about the physical act of breathing, it was about the emotional and mental release it offered. Margaret found that when she took the time to breathe deeply, to slow down and appreciate the beauty of nature, she could face the world with a greater sense of peace and acceptance. She didn't need to control everything. All she needed to do was breathe, trust the process, and allow herself to heal. On one of her walks, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a soft pink, Margaret paused for a moment, closing her eyes and taking a long, deep breath. She could feel the cool evening air fill her lungs, and as she exhaled, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. In that moment, she knew that everything was going to be okay, that the healing she had been searching for had already begun. As she continued her walk, Margaret smiled to herself, grateful for the fresh air, for the earth, and for the peace that nature had brought back into her life. She had learned that sometimes all it took was a breath to remind herself that she was alive, that life was beautiful, and that healing was always within reach. Margaret sat on a moss-covered rock, her eyes closed, and her face tilted toward the sky. The forest around her was alive with sounds. The gentle rustling of the leaves in the trees, the soft chirping of birds, and the distant murmur of a stream flowing over rocks. She had come to the forest to escape the noise of the world, to find peace in the simple sounds of nature. For Margaret, nature had always been a source of comfort, but it wasn't until recently that she truly understood the healing power of sound. When she was younger, she had always been so focused on the busyness of life, on work, on family, on responsibilities, that she never fully appreciated the sounds that had surrounded her. It wasn't until she found herself struggling with grief and loss that she began to listen more closely, to hear the gentle symphony of the natural world. One of the first things Margaret noticed after she began spending more time in nature was how soothing the sounds were. The birds singing in the trees, the rustling of the leaves in the wind, and even the distant sound of water flowing. It all had a calming effect on Irma. She had spent so many years living in a world of noise, cars honking, people talking, the constant hum of the city, that she had forgotten what true silence felt like. But in the forest, there was a different kind of silence, a peaceful, harmonious silence that was filled with the gentle sounds of nature. The more Margaret listened, the more she realized how deeply the sounds of nature affected her. There was something about the rhythm of the forest, the way the leaves swayed in the wind, the way the birds called to each other, that it brought a sense of balance to her life. The sounds were a reminder that life, in all its chaos and beauty, was always in motion. The world was alive, and there was a natural rhythm to everything. If only you took the time to listen. Margaret had always loved the sound of water, but now she found herself drawn to it more than ever. There was a small stream that ran through the woods near her home, and she often went there to sit by the water, listening to the sound of the stream flowing over the rocks. The water seemed to speak to her in a way that nothing else could, calming her and soothing her weary heart. The rhythmic sound of the water was like a lullaby, a reminder that everything in life moved at its own pace, and that there was no need to rush. One afternoon, as she sat by the stream, Margaret's daughter, Emily, joined her. Margaret noticed that Emily looked tired, her shoulders tense from the weight of her own struggles. Margaret had always been able to read her daughter well, and she knew that Emily was carrying a lot on her shoulders. As Emily sat down next to her, Margaret said nothing at first. Instead, she simply listened to the sound of the stream, the birds in the trees, and the wind in the leaves. Emily looked at her mother, her brow furrowed with concern. "Mom," she said softly, "I've been feeling so overwhelmed lately. It feels like everything is moving too fast, and I can't keep up. I don't know how to handle it all." Margaret smiled gently and placed a hand on her daughter's. "Sweetheart, Sometimes we get so caught up in the noise of life that we forget to listen to the sounds that really matter. Do you hear the birds, Emily? Do you hear the stream? The earth is speaking to us, telling us to slow down, to take a moment to listen. Emily closed her eyes, following her mother's advice. At first, the sounds seemed distant, muffled by her own thoughts. But as she focused, she began to notice the rhythm of the world around her. The chirping of the birds, the rustling of the leaves, and the sound of the water flowing. All of these sounds became clearer, more distinct, and somehow more meaningful. "I've been so focused on the noise in my head," Emily said, her voice soft. "I've been thinking about the future, about what I have to do next, about the things I'm not doing right. But I never stopped to listen, to really hear what's around me." Margaret nodded, understanding her daughter's frustration. "That's the power of nature, Emily. It's always there, waiting for us to listen. When we slow down and pay attention to the sounds of the world, we can find peace. We can find clarity." Nature has a way of healing us, of reminding us that we don't need to carry the weight of the world on our own. For a while, mother and daughter sat in silence, listening to the symphony of the forest. As the minutes passed, Margaret could see the tension in Emily's face begin to ease. The weight of her thoughts seemed to lighten, and her shoulders relaxed. It was as if the sounds of nature were working their magic, helping Emily find a sense of calm and balance that she had been missing. Margaret had learned this lesson long ago, that nature had the power to heal not only the body, but the mind and soul as well. The sounds of nature were like a balm, soothing the mind and helping people reconnect with themselves. She had spent so many years looking for answers in the noise of the world, but now she understood that the answers were always there, waiting to be heard. As they sat together, listening to the birds in the stream, Emily smiled. "I think I get it, Mom. I don't have to have all the answers right now. I just need to take a breath, listen to the world around me, and trust that everything will work out." Margaret smiled back at her, feeling a sense of pride and peace. "Exactly, Emily. Life is not about having it all figured out. It's about being present, being open to the healing power of nature, and allowing yourself the space to breathe and listen." From that day on, Emily began to make a habit of spending time outside, listening to the sounds of nature whenever she felt overwhelmed. Whether it was the rustling of leaves, the sound of the wind, or the gentle flow of water, she learned to appreciate the soothing effects of nature's symphony. And with each passing day, Emily found herself more at peace, more grounded, and more connected to the world around her. Margaret knew that the healing power of nature was something that would stay with her daughter for the rest of her life. It was a gift that she could carry with her wherever she went, a reminder that no matter how difficult life became, there was always solace in the sounds of the earth. As Margaret sat by the stream that day, the gentle sound of the water filling the air, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had found peace in nature, and now she had shared that peace with her daughter. The world may have been chaotic, but in the quiet of the forest, Margaret had discovered a timeless wisdom, the healing power of nature and the transformative effect it could have on the soul. Margaret had always known the importance of staying grounded, both physically and emotionally. But it wasn't until recently that she discovered just how deeply she could connect with the earth beneath her feet. It started with a simple desire to feel the warmth of the ground beneath her, to experience nature in its purest form, without barriers between her and the earth. One morning as she walked through her garden, Margaret noticed the coolness of the grass beneath her shoes. She paused, looking down at the soft blades swaying gently in the breeze. A thought came to her, something she had read about in a book years ago but had never really considered trying herself. Walking barefoot on the earth. The idea seemed so simple, so natural, and yet Margaret had never fully embraced it. She had always been cautious, worried about stepping on something sharp or dirty. But today, something inside her urged her to take the leap, to feel the earth directly beneath her. Margaret slowly slipped off her sandals, feeling the cool grass on her feet for the first time in years. The sensation was immediate, refreshing, grounding, and strangely comforting. She took a step forward, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft soil. With each step, she felt more connected to the earth, more present in the moment. It was as though the earth itself was supporting her, reminding her that she was not alone, that she was part of something much larger than herself. As Margaret walked through the garden, she could feel the energy of the earth beneath her feet. It was as if every step she took was a reminder of her connection to nature, to the world around her. The ground felt solid, stable, and reassuring. It was a subtle but powerful sensation, a reminder that no matter how chaotic or uncertain life could be, the earth would always be there, steady and unwavering. Margaret continued her walk, venturing into the yard and onto the soft dirt path that led through the forest. The dirt felt different from the grass. It was warmer, softer, and slightly more uneven. But as her feet touched the ground, she felt a sense of balance, as though the earth was gently adjusting to her movements. It was a strange feeling, almost as if she were learning to trust the earth once again, to allow it to support her as she navigated the twists and turns of life. As she walked, Margaret felt her mind begin to clear. The usual chatter of her thoughts started to fade, replaced by the rhythmic sound of her footsteps and the quiet whispers of the wind. She could feel the earth's energy flowing through her, connecting her to the natural world in a way she had never experienced before. Each step seemed to bring her closer to a sense of inner peace, a deep sense of connection to herself and to the world around her. It was in that moment that Margaret realized the profound impact that walking barefoot on the earth had on her. It wasn't just about feeling the ground beneath her feet. It was about reconnecting with something deep within herself. In a world that was often loud and chaotic, walking barefoot offered her a chance to slow down, to be present, and to embrace the simplicity of life. Margaret had spent so many years rushing through life, always focused on the next task, the next goal, the next thing she needed to do. But walking barefoot allowed her to focus on the here and now, to experience the world in a way that was more tangible, more real. She could feel the earth beneath her, supporting her every step, and in that moment, she felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. After a while, Margaret sat down on a large rock near the edge of the garden. Her feet were covered in dirt, but she didn't mind. It was a reminder that she had connected with the earth, that she had allowed herself to be vulnerable and open to the healing power of nature. She sat there for a while, letting the quiet of the world wash over her. The sound of birds chirping, the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the distant hum of the earth. All of it was soothing, comforting, and healing. As she sat there, Margaret thought about how far she had come in her healing journey. When she first arrived at this house, she had been consumed by grief, overwhelmed by loss. But now, after months of reconnecting with nature, she felt a sense of renewal. The earth had helped her heal, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well. By walking barefoot, she had learned to let go of the past, to be more present in the moment, and to trust in the healing power of nature. A few days later, Emily came to visit, and Margaret decided to share her new discovery with her daughter. "Come, sit with me," Margaret said, patting the ground beside her. "I want to show you something." Emily looked at her mother curiously, but she joined her on the grass. "What's this, Mom?" Margaret smiled and kicked off her sandals. "I've been walking barefoot in the garden, Emily. It's something I've never really done before, but it's been so healing for me. The earth, it's more than just the ground we walk on. It's alive, and when we connect with it, it helps us heal." Emily hesitated at first, but then she followed her mother's lead, kicking off her shoes and sitting down beside her. "It feels different," she said, feeling the soft grass and dirt under her feet. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Margaret said softly. "We've forgotten how to really connect with the earth. We're so used to wearing shoes, to blocking ourselves off from the natural world. But when we go barefoot, we reconnect with the earth, and it has a way of grounding us, of healing us." As they sat together, Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude for the moment she was sharing with her daughter. It was a simple thing, but it was so meaningful. She had found peace and healing in the most unexpected places by simply walking barefoot on the earth. And now she was sharing that gift with Emily. Margaret knew that, like her, Emily would discover the healing power of nature in her own time. But for now, it was enough to know that they were both on this journey together. They were both learning to trust the earth beneath their feet, to slow down, and to reconnect with the healing energy that the earth had to offer. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the garden, Margaret smiled to herself. She'd come a long way from the woman she had been when she first moved here. The earth had given her a new sense of purpose, a new sense of peace, and she knew that as long as she stayed connected to nature, she would continue to heal and grow. Margaret sat alone on the edge of a small pond, her feet dangling in the cool water. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow across the landscape. The air was crisp, carrying the fresh scent of the earth and the trees. As she sat there, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the stillness of the moment wash over her. It had been some time since she had spent a moment alone like this. Life had a way of filling her days with noise and activity. First, it had been raising her children, then managing a busy career, and later caring for her family. But now, in the quiet of this little corner of the world, Margaret found solace. The solitude didn't feel lonely. It was the kind of peaceful solitude that allowed her to connect with herself in ways she never had before. After Henry's passing, Margaret had often felt overwhelmed by the absence of his presence. The house had seemed too quiet, the days too long. But over the months, she had come to realize that being alone didn't have to mean being lonely. It was in these moments of solitude that Margaret found herself truly listening to her thoughts and feelings, discovering a deeper understanding of who she was and what she needed. Margaret's walks in the woods, her time spent in the garden, and her moments of silence by the lake had become a kind of sanctuary. She had come to appreciate the value of being alone, of having time to reflect, to process, and to heal. There was no rush in nature. Time seemed to stretch and slow down, allowing her the space to just be. As she sat by the pond, Margaret thought about the many years she had spent surrounded by people, always focused on the needs of others. It wasn't that she regretted it. She had loved being a mother, a wife, and a caretaker. But now, in this quiet moment, she realized how much she had neglected herself. For so long, she had been too busy, too caught up in the demands of life, to pay attention to her own heart. But now, in her solitude, she had the chance to listen, to truly hear what her heart needed. Margaret had always found strength in her relationships with others, but she had come to see that the strength she sought had to come from within. In the quiet of the pond, surrounded by the gentle sounds of nature, she began to feel that strength rising within her. She didn't need anyone else to complete her. She was enough. She had always been enough. The solitude was not an escape from her grief, but rather a way for her to process it. She had learned that healing didn't always come from being surrounded by people or distractions. Sometimes healing came from sitting with your pain, from giving yourself permission to feel it, and then letting it go. The quiet allowed her to acknowledge her grief, to give it the space it needed, and to slowly release it. As Margaret sat there listening to the chirping of the birds and the rustling of the leaves, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had learned to embrace the solitude, to find comfort in her own company. It was in these moments of stillness that she was able to reconnect with herself, to find clarity in her thoughts and healing in her heart. Over the years, Margaret had become accustomed to the noise of the world, the constant chatter, the demands, the expectations. But now she realized that there was a kind of beauty in the quiet. The world outside could be chaotic, but in her solitude, she found a sense of calm and clarity that she couldn't find anywhere else. Emily had noticed a change in her mother. Margaret seemed more at peace, more centered, and more content. She had always known her mother as a woman who gave so much to others, but now she saw that Margaret was learning to give to herself. Emily understood that her mother's journey wasn't about forgetting the past or escaping from it. It was about finding peace within herself, finding the strength to heal and to move forward. One afternoon, Emily came to visit, and as they walked through the garden, she commented on the way her mother had changed. "Mom, I can't believe how much you've grown, how much more at peace you seem. You've always been there for everyone else, but now you seem to be learning to be there for yourself too." Margaret smiled softly. "It's taken me a long time, Emily. I used to think that being strong meant always being busy, always doing for others. But I've learned that true strength comes from within. It's about finding the courage to face the quiet, to sit with your thoughts, and to be at peace with yourself." Emily nodded, taking in her mother's words. "I think I've been doing the same thing, rushing around, trying to take care of everyone and everything. But maybe it's time for me to take a step back, to listen to myself for a change." Margaret placed a gentle hand on Emily's arm. "It's never too late to start, sweetheart. The quiet will always be there when you need it. The earth, the trees, the birds, they will always welcome you. But you have to be willing to listen, to embrace the stillness, and to find your peace within." Margaret had found that peace. She had found it in the quiet moments by the lake, in the stillness of the forest, and in the solitude of the pond. And now she was sharing it with Emily. The healing power of nature was not just about the sights and sounds. It was about the quiet moments when you could hear your own heart, when you could reconnect with your soul and find peace within. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had come a long way from the woman she had been when she first arrived at the cottage. The solitude had not been her enemy, it had been her teacher. It had taught her to listen, to be present, and to embrace the healing power of silence. Margaret smiled as she looked at Emily. "We're never truly alone, you know. Even in our solitude, we are connected to the earth, to the sky, to each other. The healing we seek is always within us, and nature has a way of reminding us of that." And so, in the quiet of the evening, surrounded by the beauty of nature, mother and daughter sat together in peace. knowing that they had both learned something valuable, that in solitude there was strength, there was healing, and there was the wisdom of age waiting to be embraced. Margaret stood at the edge of her garden, watching as the first signs of autumn began to appear. The leaves on the trees had started to change color, transitioning from green to brilliant hues of red, orange, and yellow. The crisp air had replaced the warmth of summer, and the ground beneath her feet felt different, as if it was preparing for the change that was to come. Autumn had always been one of Margaret's favorite seasons. There was something about the way the world seemed to transform so dramatically that she couldn't help but be in awe. The colors, the scents, the feeling in the air. It was as if the earth was preparing for something new, something fresh. It reminded her of the cycles of life, how everything in nature had its time to grow, to flourish, and to rest. It was in these transitions, in these moments of change, that Margaret had found her own sense of renewal. She had learned so much over the past few years about herself and about the world around her. When she first came to this cottage, she had been consumed with grief and sadness. The loss of Henry had left her feeling lost, unsure of her place in the world. But now, as she watched the seasons change before her, Margaret realized that the earth had a way of reminding her that change was a part of life. The trees shed their leaves in the fall, only for them to be reborn in the spring. The earth rested in the winter, only to awaken again with the warmth of the sun. The seasons, like life, were cyclical, and with every ending came a new beginning. As Margaret walked through her garden, she took in the beauty of the changing season. She had spent years tending to her flowers, planting new seeds, and nurturing the growth of her plants. And now, as the seasons shifted, she saw the fruits of her labor. Her garden was filled with vibrant colors and healthy plants, each one a testament to the time and care she had given them. She paused by a rose bush that had just begun to bloom, its petals soft and fragrant. She ran her fingers over the delicate flowers, marveling at their beauty. For so long, Margaret had focused on the things she couldn't change. The loss of Henry, the passage of time, the things that had slipped away. But in this moment, surrounded by the colors and scents of autumn, she realized that she had the power to create something beautiful, to cultivate peace in her life, just as she had cultivated the garden. Margaret thought about how much she had grown over the past year. When she first came to this place, she had been consumed by sorrow. But now, as the seasons changed, she found herself accepting the ebb and flow of life. She had learned to let go of the things she couldn't control and to embrace the beauty of the present moment. The garden, with its cycles of growth and decay, had become a reflection of her own journey, a journey of healing, of renewal, and of self-discovery. One day, as Margaret sat by the edge of the pond, Emily came to visit. She noticed the way her mother had been spending more time outdoors, more time in tune with the changing seasons. Margaret had always loved the outdoors, but now there was a new sense of purpose in her actions. Emily could see it in the way her mother walked through the garden, how she appreciated every detail. The way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the way the leaves danced in the wind, the way the flowers bloomed and then faded, only to be reborn again. "Mom," Emily said softly, "I can see how much you've changed. You're different now. You seem at peace." Margaret smiled, her eyes softening. "I've learned to accept change, Emily. Life is full of seasons, of beginnings and endings, of growth and rest. I've learned to embrace it all, to let go of what I can't control, and to trust that everything will unfold in its own time." Emily sat down beside her mother, looking out at the garden. I've been thinking about what you've said about how life is cyclical. I think I've been afraid of change, afraid of what might happen if I let go of the past. But I can see now that change is just a part of life. It's not something to fear, it's something to embrace. Margaret nodded, her heart swelling with pride. You're right, sweetheart. We can't stop the seasons from changing, but we can choose how we respond to them. We can choose to embrace each new season, to find joy in the present moment, and to trust that every ending brings with it the promise of a new beginning. As they sat there together, watching the leaves fall gently to the ground, Margaret felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that the changing seasons would continue to offer their lessons. Lessons about patience, about growth, and about the beauty of transformation. She was no longer afraid of change. Instead, she welcomed it with open arms, knowing that, just like the earth, she too could find renewal in the cycles of life. Emily sat quietly beside her mother, feeling a sense of comfort and understanding. She had always admired her mother's strength, but now she saw something deeper. Margaret had learned to find peace in the ebb and flow of life. She had found a way to embrace change, to accept the passing of time, and to find renewal in every season. It was a lesson that Emily would carry with her for the rest of her life. As Margaret walked back to the house, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had found peace in the changing seasons, and in that peace, she had found the strength to move forward. The earth had shown her that, no matter what life brought her way, there was always a chance for renewal, always a way to begin again. And as the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows over the garden, Margaret knew that she had found something precious, a new way of seeing the world, a way of embracing the beauty of life in all its seasons. Margaret stood at the edge of the forest once again, this time feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. The trees were still, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting a soft golden glow on the forest floor. She had walked this path many times before, but today everything felt different. Today, she felt a deeper connection to the earth than ever before, a connection that had been growing ever since she first stepped foot in the woods months ago. It had been a long and transformative journey for Margaret. When she first arrived at the cottage, she was broken, grieving the loss of her husband Henry, and unsure of how to move forward. But with each step she took in the woods, with each breath she took in the fresh air, she felt herself healing. The forest had become her sanctuary, a place where she could find solace and peace, a place where she could reconnect with herself and with the world around her. Margaret had learned so much during her time in the forest. She had learned to listen to the wind as it whispered through the trees, to listen to the birds as they sang their songs, to listen to the earth as it breathed beneath her feet. The forest had taught her that there was wisdom in silence, that sometimes the most important thing was to stop and simply be present in the moment. But what Margaret had come to realize over time was that the healing power of nature wasn't just about the peace she found in the woods. It wasn't just about the beauty of the trees, the birds, or the sunlight filtering through the leaves. It was about the deeper, more profound connection between herself and the earth. Margaret had come to understand that she was not separate from the earth. She was a part of it. The earth had nourished her, and she had nourished it in return. Margaret smiled softly to herself as she reflected on how far she had come. She had been on a journey of healing, but it was also a journey of rediscovery, a rediscovery of herself and of her place in the world. She had learned that healing didn't happen overnight. It was a process, a slow and steady unfolding of the heart and soul. But with every step she took, with every breath she took, she had come close to the person she was meant to be. As Margaret walked deeper into the forest, she felt the ground beneath her feet shift. The earth was soft, moist from the rain that had fallen earlier in the day. She let her fingers brush against the bark of the trees as she passed by, feeling the rough texture beneath her fingertips. The connection to the earth was undeniable. She could feel it in her bones, in her very being. It was as if the earth was holding her, supporting her, and guiding her along her journey. Over time, Margaret had come to realize that nature was not just a healer, it was a teacher. The earth had taught her patience, had shown her the importance of letting go, and had reminded her that everything in life was connected. The trees, the birds, the flowers, they were all part of the same system, each playing a role in the cycle of life. Just as the earth gave life to the plants and animals that lived on it, it also gave life to her, too. And in return, she had learned to give back, to be mindful of her impact on the world, to respect the natural world, and to live in harmony with it. Margaret's journey of healing had not been easy, but it had been deeply rewarding. She had faced the depths of her grief, had allowed herself to feel the pain, and had found the strength to rise again. The forest, with its quiet wisdom and healing power, had been her guide, showing her that there was always light after darkness, that there was always hope after despair. Now, as Margaret stood in the forest, she knew that her journey was not over. The earth would always be there for her, just as it had always been. And she, in turn, would continue to care for it, to nurture it, and to listen to its wisdom. She had learned that the connection between humans and nature was a sacred one, a relationship that needed to be honored and respected. Margaret took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh, earthy air. She felt a sense of peace settle in her chest, a calm that came from knowing that she was exactly where she needed to be. The forest had shown her the way, had helped her heal, and had reminded her of the power of connection. And as she stood there, with the trees swaying gently in the wind and the birds singing above her, Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude for the earth, for the lessons it had taught her, and for the peace it had brought into her life. For Margaret, the healing power of nature was not just about the physical world around her. It was about the emotional, mental, and spiritual connection that she had with the earth. It was about understanding that she was part of something much larger than herself, something eternal and unchanging. The earth had always been here, and it would continue to be here long after she was gone. But while she was here, Margaret knew that she had the power to live in harmony with it, to listen to its wisdom, and to find healing in its embrace. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the forest, Margaret sat down on a large rock near the stream. She closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the water flowing over the rocks, the rustling of the leaves in the trees, and the birds singing their evening songs. In that moment, Margaret felt at peace. She was exactly where she needed to be, surrounded by the beauty and wisdom of nature. The journey was not over, but Margaret knew that she was no longer alone. The earth would always be with her, guiding her, healing her, and reminding her of the power of connection. And for that, Margaret was forever grateful.